Welcome to the Holy Post. Former President and born-again Christian Jimmy Carter died at the age of 100. As the media reflects on his legacy of public service and humanitarianism, some are contrasting Carter's faith with that of conservative white evangelicals. Esau McCaulley joins us this week to say that Carter is being used as a cudgel by progressives to shame their political opponents. Is he right? And then Phil and I unpack two explanations for the country's rejection of President Carter for Ronald Reagan in 1980. Was Carter too liberal, or was he too humble? Then pastor and Holy Post Pundit Gabriel Salguero is back to talk about a second Trump administration's plan to deport millions of undocumented immigrants, and how Christians and church leaders should hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Also this week, Phil wants to do a telethon for turtles. We've just entered another year, and it's a great time to become a Holy Post Plus subscriber. This week, Caitlin Chess is doing a special episode of Getting Schooled about heresy. It seems like everyone who disagrees with us is immediately labeled a heretic, especially if you read social media. But Caitlin explains how that label of heretic has been very specifically and carefully defined throughout church history, and why we ought to be more careful in how we throw it around. Of course, that's just the beginning of what's available for Holy Post Plus subscribers. You'll also get full episodes of the Skye Pod every Friday, access to the Holy Post Book Club with free ebooks or hardcover books, bonus interviews with our guests, exclusive merchandise, access to live streams, live events, and a whole lot more. So come on over to the community, join us at Holy Post Plus, support the good work we're doing, and engage with other like-minded people around the topics that you care most about. Go to holypost.com to sign up. All right, here is episode 651.
Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. This is Phil Vischer. I'm here with Skye Jitani. Hi, Skye.
Hello, Phil. Happy New Year.
You don't have a hat for us today, Skye. Why?
We got a bunch of new hats, but they're all pink, Phil. They're all pink. They're all for like Caitlin.
Really? Yeah. Caitlin has completely overwhelmed your hat drive.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. People got to send me in some, masculine hats.
Yeah, macho hats. That's our new campaign. Send Skye macho hats with macho slogans, like keep trucking hats and God and guns hats. What other macho hats could we have? Hey, Esau McCaulley's here. Hi, Esau. How's it going?
I didn't want to interrupt the hat discourse. Y'all keep cooking. I'll just stay back and wait on my turn. So yeah, good to be here, though.
What's a really masculine hat that someone could send Skye?
Like a fedora.
I mean, I feel like hat and head shape is a personal matter because like only certain hats work on certain heads, and he's had his head his whole life. So Skye knows what hat works on his head. I don't.
Yeah.
So I have no recommendations for him.
If you're going to put a ball cap on Skye Jitani's bald head, what does it say? Make
Sky's the limit.
America. Sky's the limit. Okay, that's great.
Esau, are you a hat guy?
No, I'm not a real hat guy. I'm kind of like I have a big head, so I have to have the right kind of hat because I need to have a hat that allows me to lie, that I can use 2 or 3 buttons back there. But like a 1-button hat, like if my head's so big I can only do 1 button in the back, that doesn't work. And fitted hats don't usually work for me either. I don't know. I kind of wear hats, but it's not a thing, I guess you want to say.
Hey guys, it's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. Skye and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Caitlin. Today's episode is sponsored by Sunday's Food for Dogs. We've been talking about Sunday's Food for Dogs for a while now, and I gotta say, our dog Keena really loves the stuff, and so do we. It's healthy dog food that's easy to store and serve, made from a short list of human-grade ingredients. Sunday's contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% anything unhealthy or artificial. Unlike other fresh dog foods, Sunday's is air-dried, so it doesn't require refrigeration or prep. Folks who switch their dogs to Sundays report softer fur, fresher breath, better energy, and more. Sundays comes right to our door, so we never run out of dog food. Easy to store, easy to serve, good for your dog. And you can get 40% off your first order of Sundays. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. That's sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. Or use code HOLYPOST at checkout for 40% off your first order. This episode of the Holy Post is sponsored by Hiya Health. Hey, do you have kids? Do you care about their health? Of course you do. Most kids' vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk kids really shouldn't be eating. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved, super-powered, chewable vitamin for kids. 0 sugar, 0 gummy junk, yet they taste great and are perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full-body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. And we've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you need to go to hiyahealth.com/holypost. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com/holypost and get your kids the full-body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. And thanks to Hiya Health for sponsoring this episode. And we're back. Esau's here. Caitlin was actually scheduled, but she had a travel something other. She had a snafu. So Esau volunteered graciously to jump in last minute and fill in. But that means you have to wear a pink hat. So you need to go to the office, get one of the pink hats, and come back to your house and put it on.
Okay, can I slide?
Real quick?
I'll be back in about 10 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, sure. We'll wait. We'll just wait. It's a new year. It is time to focus on what is really important in this new year. And what is really, really important is a sea turtle plagued by a condition called bubble butt. Yes, it's time for News of the Butt. First one of the year.
And now it's time for News of the Butt.
A sea turtle plagued by bubble butt condition is helped by a 3D printer. Okay, can you just imagine? Can you just try to picture how a 3D printer could help a sea turtle who has a condition called bubble butt? Esau, come on. What springs to mind?
What springs to mind is whoever it was who sat in the lab or in the computer place years ago and invented the 3D printer and had dreams of how this is going to help and make humanity better. And he finds his invention on the bubble butt section of Holy Post. And I'm just wondering what he's thinking about his life decisions.
Sea turtles occasionally see. This is a feel good story, though. Esau, it's a feel good story. Okay. Because sometimes sea turtles are struck by boat propellers. Did you know that can happen sometimes? There are boat strikes on sea turtles. Yep, it's true. Okay. But they can survive, but as they heal from the trauma, their shells often change shape, bulging from air building up within their bodies. This throws the animal's buoyancy off kilter when they swim, leading to what is called positive buoyancy syndrome, or more colorfully, bubble butt syndrome. So turtles, let me just walk through this with you. Turtles that get hit by propellers, and they say they think this is how it happens. They think this is how it happens, that it does damage to their spinal cords, because a turtle's spinal cord runs right along the inside of its shell. It's attached to its shell. It's a very common condition in wild sea turtles because their spinal cord is connected to the top of their shells. If a boat's propeller strikes the shell, it can damage the spinal cord and interfere with gastrointestinal function. So really what you're seeing is, says Mystic Aquarium senior veterinarian Dr. Molly Martoni, the animals floating from the gas that's in their intestines. Why is this bad? Because isn't floating good?
Isn't there a natural way of removing that gas from your intestines?
Clearly, Skye, if this is a syndrome, the natural way is no longer effective.
Okay, so what you're really saying is we have a problem with sea turtles getting struck by boats and they can no longer fart.
They can't naturally get the gas out of their systems. Yes.
What I said.
But
right.
I'm not going to use such crude language because there's a pastor here, a newly launched pastor, and he needs to keep things classy. Keep things classy.
You know, we have meetings sometimes, and I'm going to bring people behind the curtain. We sometimes have meetings with the Holy Post. And, you know, the Holy Post, the flagship, as you all like to call it here, is a quite popular podcast, much more popular than the Esau McCaulley podcast. And I thought maybe we need to up our commentary. Maybe we need to go deeper in our theological analysis. Maybe it's the fact that I just refuse to participate in the news of the butt. Maybe what's holding me back as a podcaster is that I'm refusing to, once again, embrace stories about the butts of sea turtles. But you continue on. I will continue to resist, but you will continue to float those things, float these ideas.
Yeah. Esau, your problem is, like the sea turtles, you just won't release that. You have to let it go.
See, that's what I'm talking about. That's just not my thing. Not my thing. I'll just be less successful. How about that?
What's holding you back is your reluctance to cover your back side.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So there's a particular sea turtle named Charlotte. Charlotte is a boy. Apparently they named the sea turtle before they discovered it was a boy. So for the rest of its life, it's a boy named Charlotte. There's problem number one for Charlotte, the sea turtle. Problem number two is it was injured by a boat strike, and it's got bubble butt syndrome. The problem with that is you're too buoyant, and turtles tend to get their food from the bottom. They dive down to the bottom, and if you're too buoyant, you can't dive well, and you can starve to death because you can't function well. So they tried. This is where science comes to the rescue. Esau, if you ever have a problem in your life, just ring the science bell. Ding, 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 and science will come to the rescue. Science comes to the rescue. First, we need to correct the buoyancy of Charlotte, the male sea turtle. So they tried gluing lead weights on his bubble butt to correct his buoyancy. And that technically works, except the weights don't stay on because sea turtles slough off layers of their shell. And so bye-bye lead weights, whoops, and then Charlotte bobs right up to the surface and can't find food anymore. So they decided they needed to come up with some kind of harness that was custom fit to Charlotte's, the male sea turtle's shell. And so they used CAD, computer-aided design, and 3D printing, and made it rather elaborate. It took several years. Also, Charlotte, the male sea turtle, doesn't bob. It seems like a lot of work to keep a sea turtle from bobbing.
Can I know that I shouldn't ask follow-up questions, but how scalable is this particular solution? Are they going to find all of the so afflicted turtles and give them all this kind of, I guess, harness? Or is there going to... Do you remember...
Are you old enough to remember the Jerry Lewis telethons?
Yes, I remember the Jerry Lewis telethons.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to do next. We need a celebrity like Danny Kaye in children's hospitals, Jerry Lewis, and what was the disease he was trying to cure? I can't remember.
ALS? Was it not ALS?
No, I don't know. I don't think it was ALS. We need a celebrity. I'm thinking
muscular dystrophy. I forget. Sorry,
Phil,
never mind.
It's obvious. It's obvious.
Will Ferrell. Will Ferrell is going to do fundraisers to raise money for bubble-butted turtles so they can all be fit with custom designed 3D printed lead weight filled harnesses to correct their buoyancy.
I think this sounds like your calling, Phil. My
calling.
Yeah.
My calling.
You're the butt guy.
You think I want to host a 24-hour telethon in a tux with a cigarette in my hand, slurring my words progressively more and more as the night goes on, and Dean Martin keeps refilling my drink without me noticing? You think that's the life I want, Skye? Jitani?
That's the life I want for you. I would love to see that.
You don't know me well. The Turtle Hospital in Florida currently has around 15 turtles that are non-releasable due to bubble butt syndrome. So there's 15 turtles. There's a gaggle of turtles. What's a group of turtles called? I'm going to go with gaggle. There's a gaggle of turtles.
School.
Oh, I doubt it. They're not fish, Skye, that could be released if only we could raise enough money to give them their custom fit bubble butt slings. Okay, I'm done with this.
A group of turtles is a bale.
B-A-L-E?
B-A-L-E.
B-A-I-L. B-A-L?
Yeah,
like
well,
Christian
there are
Bale.
several different
so
nouns
Christian
you can
Bale
use.
is a group of turtles.
There's a
That
bale of
explains
turtles,
lot.
a dole of turtles, and a nest of turtles.
Well, I can
That's
figure
what-
out nest.
That's
What's a
what
dole?
Google says. I don't know. That's what Google says. I just found the article that you're drawing this from, Phil, and there is a video that goes
Yeah.
along with it, and it's a YouTube video, and it's titled,
Yeah.
Did We Cure Bubble Butt? So,
Well,
for those who want to
we
see
figured
it.
out how to correct for it. I wouldn't say we cured it because that would be helping them not have the problem. We figured out how to correct buoyancy, but now we need an annual Memorial Day or Labor Day 24-hour telethon to raise money for the 15 bubble-butted sea turtles at the Turtle Hospital.
What
It sounds
color
like
would
a
the
children's
ribbon
book,
be?
doesn't it? The ribbon, tie a
Oh, man.
turtle ribbon. It'd be that turtle pattern, that green, kind of almost like giraffe spots, but it's turtle pattern.
This is 10 minutes of my life I'm never getting back. I just want you to
Good,
realize.
Esau? Are you good, Esau? All right.
You're welcome.
This has been the news of the butt.
Okay. Jimmy Carter died. Did you hear about that?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
it was a slow news week, and I think that's all everyone was talking about.
Yeah, I was actually a little surprised how everyone, it's been a while since a president died. Well, George Sr. died not too long ago. I don't remember this much press coverage over George Sr. And Jimmy Carter was in hospice for 2 years, so it wasn't like a surprise or anything. He was 100. Oldest president ever. Married to his wife, Rosalind, for 77 years. 77 years.
Yeah,
That's
when did
great.
she die?
A couple of years ago. They were failing together, and everyone thought they would die on the same day. And then she died, and he went into hospice and just kept chugging along. Do you know why? Because he eats nothing but peanuts. That's the secret to his longevity. Okay.
I think that Jimmy Carter was old enough for most of us not to have a memory of his actual policies.
Yeah.
And he kind of harkened back to in our imagination, whether or not that's actually true of him as a president, he kind of harkened back to a different era of politics, such that we just don't have the emotional energy to be mad at whatever Jimmy Carter did back in, I'm just going to be honest, right? So I think that any president, I would say, once you get to the 80s, like Reagan and Clinton, all of those for different reasons will be in living memory divisive figures. And I just don't think anybody remembered to be mad at Jimmy Carter about whatever Jimmy Carter did.
I think even the people, our parents' generation who do remember, at least my engagement with it is, I don't know too many people who are angry at Jimmy Carter. There are people who feel like his presidency was a failure or didn't work out well, but it's not personal. And they don't, he's not a divisive figure the way Reagan or Bill Clinton or and certainly Obama and Trump were.
Skye, if you remember Kristen Dumais' book, Jesus and John Wayne, Jimmy Carter was key in galvanizing the religious right because he really ticked off James Dobson and a few others. And do you remember the event that ticked them off so much?
Yeah, it was Bob Jones.
Well, there was that. That was event number one. They, under Jimmy Carter, the IRS actually pursued the Southern schools that were failing to integrate rather than just saying it was illegal, but not pursuing. So
the IRS was going to revoke their tax exemption for failing to
he
admit
did make
students.
some Southern Christian leaders like Jerry Falwell angry. But everyone was worried about the family, the state of the family in the 1970s, and unmarried families were skyrocketing, and single parenting was skyrocketing, and divorce was skyrocketing, and after Roe, abortion was skyrocketing. And so Jimmy Carter said, we're going to pull together a summit on the family, And people like James Dobson and other people on the right said, yes, our Southern Baptist Christian president is pulling together a summit on the family, and we can return to traditional values, Christian family values. That's what we need to promote. And then Jimmy Carter turned around and invited lesbians to come and be part of the thing, and invited the LGBT movement to be part of the thing. And all the guys on the Dobson guys went, wait a minute, we are betrayed. We are betrayed, and we're not even going to attend. And they turned on him, refused to attend, had their own competing summit about the family, and wrote off Jimmy Carter and started looking around for someone to promote instead of Jimmy Carter. And that's where Reagan came from. So it was the culture war over family values, because Esau, I'm older than you.
Okay.
I don't know if you knew that. So I was 10 when Carter was elected. I was 14 when he lost to Reagan. So I remember the general sense of, he was elected in the craze over the I Found It bumper stickers and I've Been Born Again, and the Chuck Colson book, Born Again. And everyone was saying born again, born again, born again, born again. And then Jimmy Carter came around and said, well, I've been born again. I'm a born again Christian and I want to be your president. And we all said, yay, we're going to have a born again. He was the first president to refer to himself as born again. We were all very excited about that. Very excited. We didn't really notice that he was a Democrat because we weren't sure there was that big of a difference between Democrats and Republicans, especially in Northern Christianity. We didn't really care that much. But he said he was born again. We were all excited. And so we voted for him and we got him into office and he was yay. And then he didn't do the conservative things that we wanted him to do to keep America Christian. And we turned on him. And I remember by 80, 81, 82, everyone was talking about family values. We got it. The Republican Party is now the party of family values. Family values, family values, family values. We have to do something about abortion. We have to do something about euthanasia. The culture of death is the Democratic Party. And suddenly, Jimmy Carter was just an anachronism. He just didn't fit. He didn't fit anything. He didn't fit into what we now thought of as the Democratic Party, and he didn't fit into what we now thought of as Christianity, which was highly Republican. And that was all from when I was 10 to when I was like 16. I saw it happen with my own eyes, and it changed.
I was born in 79, so I missed
everything.
It. Sorry.
I know you would. I'm sure if you'd been born just a couple of years earlier, you would have been writing about it in the New York Times.
But that was me. I was there a couple of years earlier, and I have no living memory of it, really. I remember the 80 election vaguely. But I don't disagree with your assessment, Phil, because I'm sure you were writing it all down at the time and documenting history as it was unfolding.
It's in my diary. Dear diary, I'm concerned about family values and Jimmy Carter's turn to the left.
So I think all that's true, but I think there's a whole nother dynamic that maybe we'll get into in a little bit that I think Kristen Kobes-Dumais certainly talks about, but I think there's another dynamic as to why the country turned on Carter and why conservative white Christians turned on Carter beyond inviting lesbians to the White House.
Before you explain that, well, that was a big part of it. That was like 80% of it. And 10% of it was Russia and the Iran crisis. But 80% of it was lesbians in the White House. Before we turn to that, here's just some of the headlines in the last week. CNN ran a story with the headline, Jimmy Carter embodied the road not taken by many white evangelical Christians. In other words, white evangelical Christians could have been more like Jimmy Carter, and they decided they didn't want to. The Daily Beast ran a story with the headline, Why Jimmy Carter's Life Should Make the Christian Right Feel Ashamed. Because he was a man of faith. That's the subtitle. He was a man of faith. He lived like Jesus. He cared about the poor. He built houses. He did all the good things that Jesus wants us to do. And he didn't care about all the crazy stuff that the right wants Christians to think about. So this is true. NPR for like 3 days was replaying interviews with Jimmy Carter from Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and talking about his faith and talking about the Bible. So everyone was kind of relishing his version of living out your Christian faith in the public square, relishing it and holding it up as a contrast to what we have today. Thoughts? Esau, Skye, who wants to go first? Esau has thoughts.
I want to say rest in peace to Jimmy Carter. And I don't want to, I'm going to set Jimmy Carter aside and talk about the discourse about Jimmy Carter.
Hey, you can't just change the story.
I'm not going to change the story. Trust me, because it feels like and y'all going to get tired of me coming on the podcast saying the same thing, but maybe the media should stop doing the same thing. The media seems to be incapable of having any other conversation besides two versions of white Christianity, one more conservative and one more progressive. And so the Jimmy Carter death was an occasion to say white evangelicals should be more progressive, politically and theologically. That's basically what it is. Like, Jimmy Carter was the kinds of Christian that we like, and these other Christians were the kinds of Christians that we don't like. And so I just don't find that particular conversation, once again, terribly interesting. It's the conversation we've been having for the last 10 years. And I'll say something else about that too. It's like, we need to have another version of Christianity that isn't, if you are politically or theologically conservative, you adopt all of the crazy stuff that exists in extreme Christian nationalism and MAGA. There are other Christians who are theologically traditional who don't fit that profile. And so when you say, look, you don't want to be like these people, and instead we should be like Jimmy Carter, that once again leaves out a whole swath of Christians, including the Black church, who I'm going to keep championing. And not that the Black church is monolith. The Black church isn't a monolith. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that once again, Jimmy Carter dies. And who do we talk to? White evangelicals. What do we say to white evangelicals? You should be more like Jimmy Carter. But there is a Christian tradition that is significantly similar to Jimmy Carter. It's called mainline Christianity. And so basically those stories are like, evangelicals should be more like the mainline. And if evangelicals want to be more like the mainline, you know what evangelicals would do? Become mainline Christians, which they don't seem to be interested in doing. That's my take.
Esau, I think you're right, but not entirely. And here's why.
Sparks.
I mean, part of the reason, I don't want to give the media a pass on this, but I think part of the reason they got enamored with the storyline you just described is because since the 1970s, Jimmy Carter has self-identified himself as an evangelical. He doesn't call himself a mainline Christian. He calls himself an evangelical. So by him using that label and not fitting with conservative, Republican, white evangelical politics, it makes the media go, huh? What kind of evangelical was he? And why aren't there other white evangelicals like him? So the label itself generates the narrative. And then secondly, I think one of the mistakes the media is making in this is they're comparing Jimmy Carter's post-presidency life of deep service to others and Habitat for Humanity and peace missions and feeding the poor and seeking vaccinations for guinea worm and all these other kinds of diseases. And they're going, well, why can't more evangelical Christians be like that? Why are they so caught up in the politics of the right? And I think that's an unfair narrative, because when you look at the statistics, there are a lot of white evangelicals who may well be very conservative in their politics, who nonetheless give their money to the poor and care for the homeless and do international missions work and care about Habitat for Humanity. So they're looking at white Christian evangelicals and how they vote and comparing that to how Jimmy Carter post-presidency served others. And they're not comparing the social engagement and missions work of white evangelicals. They're just looking at how they vote. And so I think the narrative that they painted is just kind of skewed that way.
And can I say, for clarity's sake, I'm happy that Jimmy Carter did all of those things. And I do believe that Christians should be more altruistic towards the poor, and they can concerned about the suffering and ignore peoples of the world. Like, I agree with that. So I'm not saying that those things aren't important. I'm not saying that those things are exclusive to the mainline tradition. But here's the thing, and maybe I want to say this as a clergy person, and this is once again a hobby horse that I feel like I might ride that hobby horse too much in 2025. At a certain point, Christianity is a set of practices, but it's also a set of beliefs. And so, yes, we should be, as Christians, we should be concerned about our neighbor. We should be concerned about the immigrant. Should be concerned about the poor. But also, part of what makes me a Christian is that I believe Jesus died for my sins, and that trusting in him brings me forgiveness and transformation. And that aspect of Christianity is not useful to people in the sense that it's going to automatically do the kinds of things people want me to do. In other words, sometimes people say Christianity is only as useful as I see it manifesting itself in public goods or service, which is important. But there's also, for the Christian, the internal work of transformation that I think is important. And so I don't believe that we have to choose between a Christianity that has core theological convictions and a Christianity that loves his neighbor. I actually think a Christianity that has love of God and love of neighbor together is what we need. And I feel like maybe part of it is only the love of neighbor part is interesting to people, which is fine. That's what they see. But I feel like as Christians, we always have to have the relationship with Jesus. And once again, I'm not saying Jimmy Carter didn't have that. I'm saying what we find interesting about Jimmy Carter is the things that we can see. And I want to say that Christianity both has this external manifestation and love of neighbor and the internal transformation that I also think is important that we can't lose track of.
Totally.
Okay.
Amen.
Okay. I want to compare Jimmy Carter to someone because I think there's a very similar dynamic. Someone who died not too long ago, who was then a Christian, an ordained pastor, who was then celebrated by the NPR crowd and, almost worshiped, held up as this is what Christianity is supposed to look like, while people on the right were saying, not a big fan. It's Fred Rogers. Fred Rogers was very similar. He was soft-spoken. He would never, ever lie. He wore cardigan sweaters. Some people didn't like Jimmy Carter just because he wore a cardigan sweater for an address from the Oval Office. And he was the first president not to do the full formal suit. He came out in a cardigan sweater to be homey and a simple man of the people. And at first we thought it was cute, and then we thought it was weak because cardigan sweaters don't free hostages in desert raids. That's the problem. Mr. Rogers doesn't free hostages in desert raids. We want somebody who's tough, and that's where... And this is where Kristen Kobes DeMay comes in. We went all John Wayne and said, Ronald Reagan. Yeah. Does he say he's born again? No. Has he had multiple wives? Yes. Does his wife have seances in the White House? I guess so. Whatever. But he's tough. Have you watched his movies? He is tough. He's strong. Yeah. He looks strong, and he makes us feel strong. And so I think that's on one hand, you've got Fred Rogers and Jimmy Carter, who are actually, Jimmy Carter's teaching Sunday school. Fred Rogers is talking about, God's love and the warm embrace of prayer. Although Fred Rogers was more theologically liberal than Jimmy Carter was. Jimmy Carter was theologically conservative till the end. He did believe that women should be pastors, but that's where he separated from the SBC. But they're both kind of avuncular, warm personalities that we decided could not give us what we want.
Phil, this is what I was hoping you were going to bring up, because this is the part that I think gets underreported about why Americans and why white evangelicals rejected Jimmy Carter back in 1980. Mm-hmm. I 100% agree with you. One thing people forget, especially if you didn't live through it or you don't study history, is Carter came into the presidency on the heels of Nixon and Whitewater and all of the abuses of Watergate. Sorry, Whitewater was Clinton. Watergate. Yeah. And he came in a way to dismantle the imperial presidency. There was a sense that the president had too much power and too much prestige. And he did some really interesting things. There's been some write-ups on this since he passed away, but he insisted on carrying his own luggage while he was president. He stopped the custom of playing Hail to the Chief whenever he entered into a room. You mentioned how he didn't wear suits, but cardigan sweaters into the Oval Office and sometimes to address the country. He talked about never lying to the country. He empowered his cabinet secretaries far more than previous presidents had to have autonomous control over their departments of the government, and not everything had to run through the political division of the West Wing. And when you look at all of that and just the humility with which he carried himself, in a weird way, it's some of the same reaction that some Catholics have had toward Pope Francis. because Pope Francis came in as a little bit of a reformer and took away some of the magisterial splendor of the papacy. And, he wore humble shoes and carried his own bags, things like that. And Carter did that too. And at first, I think the country's attitude was, well, isn't this a refreshing change of pace from Richard Nixon and that whole era and all the pomp and circumstance around a super powerful and arrogant president? But in time, I think the American people soured on it because for a lot of Americans, the president is supposed to be the incarnate representation of the country. And in a weird way, Americans want a majestic president. They want the pomp and circumstance and this larger than life character and this John Wayne kind of thing. And to be honest, I think a lot of our churches feel that way about their pastors. And, some churches, they want their pastor driving a really nice car. They want their pastor in a celebrity kind of scene. They want their pastor hobnobbing with big, powerful people and all, because it makes them have this aspirational aesthetic that I'm living vicariously through my leader. They're embodying what I want myself to be. And when Jimmy Carter came along and was humble and soft-spoken and carrying his own bags and not marching into anthems and stuff, I think after a while, people are like, that's not the America I want. I want the powerful, strong, arrogant, machismo America. And along comes Ronald Reagan, this celebrity actor. And then people are like, yeah, that's what we want. We want that guy, the tough guy who talks about the evil empire and how we're going to, stick it to the world. So, and there's a very Jesus-y thing to all of this. You see it in John 13 when Jesus washes Peter's feet and Peter won't let him do it because it's an act of humiliation. If his rabbi is washing people's feet, what does that mean about him? So he doesn't want to do it. And it's why the people rejected Jesus when Pilate turns after he's been beaten to a pulp and says, "Hail, here's the king of the Jews." And all the Jews are like, heck no, that's not our king. We're not going to be humiliated that way. We want leaders that make us feel good about ourselves. And Jimmy Carter didn't do that for Americans, and they rejected him for it. In a weird way, I think he was too Christ-like for the presidency.
Esau. Well, here's one thing before that I want Esau to react to this. Okay. Stop making that noise, Esau. I don't like it.
Oh, I didn't know I was making a noise. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you made
me.
a noise. Okay, don't do
it. Okay. We turned Jimmy Carter into Jesus. That was all. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like turning water into wine. So, okay. Fred Rogers, Donald Trump. Who's more like Jesus? Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan. Who's more like Jesus? Who do we want to be our president? Not the one who's more like Jesus.
Not Jesus.
Why? Esau, help me out.
I mean, once again, we have 4 white options for who gets to be Jesus, and who gets to be more Christ-like in the conversation. Hey. So forgive me. I mean, it's what we did. It's what we did. We keep doing it. We're going.
No, it's what I did. It's what I did. That's what you're saying. It's what I did.
And so the other thing is, and this is what I want to say. There is personality traits to Jimmy Carter that I feel like I'm this weird place. I don't want to be negative on Jimmy Carter. I don't want to do that. I am just uncomfortable with the fact that I am more apt to be personally attuned with Jimmy Carter's manner of life, in the sense that I like the stuff that he did outside of the White House. I like the fact that he cared for his community. I like the fact that he cared about justice. I like the fact that he was faithful to one woman his entire life. And all of those things are laudatory and worthy to be praised.
And then I look over. And he brought peace to the Middle East between Egypt and Israel. That was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, all of those things are important.
Okay, that wasn't outside the White House.
I think that it's also fair to say that there are some things that Jimmy, maybe he just hasn't been dead long enough for me to have the other side of it, but I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with saying Jimmy Carter was just like Jesus, and we rejected Jimmy Carter just like we rejected Jesus. And I get the point of the analogy, and I get the hypermasculinity of like kind of elements of the Republican Party. I get the hypermasculinity of some elements of the pastorate. I get the analogy, but it feels like an easy thing for us to say that the Democratic guy who just died is just like Jesus, and the Republicans who we might not like are not like Jesus at all. So that's the part of this where I feel like I'm the weird one who's saying,
what did
this
I say?
Might be too easy of an analogy.
Yeah, I said, Mr. Rogers, Donald Trump, which one is more like Jesus? If that is a controversial thing to say, I need to have a talk with you offline.
It's not a controversial thing to say. It's an easy thing to say. That's different. There's a difference. It's not controversial.
Oh, yeah.
It's an easy. Yeah, it's easy.
Yeah, I didn't have any trouble saying it. Yeah,
it's not.
I don't think. First of all, I'm not making any assessment of Jimmy Carter's policies and whether they were Christ-like or not. I'm talking about the man, and I think his humility is a reflection. It's a Christian value that I think we are called to emulate. And I don't think that value went over well with most Americans. And especially when there were challenges that came along, like the Iranian hostage crisis and inflation and OPEC and some of the other things he had to deal with during his presidency. His humility did not go over well when he goes to address the nation and starts confessing failures and mistakes that he made. It's not great. And I think, at least in my experience in the ministry subculture that I've been a part of, you hear people say all the time, oh, I want a pastor who's like Jesus, and I want a ministry leader who's like Jesus, or even I want a president who's like Jesus. And I think when you really dig down, most people don't. They say that because it's what they're supposed to say, but when you really present them some of those qualities that mark Jesus' life, it's not what most Americans want from their institutional, political, or even religious leaders. They want people who are strong, who are confident, who are brilliant communicators, who are going to stick it to their enemies, who are going to be aspirational in their leadership because they exhibit the kinds of values that people want for themselves. And in a lot of American Christian subculture, the values we want for ourselves are not the humility and suffering and self-sacrifice that epitomize the good shepherd that we claim to follow.
Esau,
and
agree,
on
disagree?
that we agree. We'll agree. I mean, we agree.
Okay. So what can we learn from the question one is, what can we learn from Jimmy Carter? Being really humble, but also rather stubborn. He was extremely stubborn. It's not a good recipe for winning a second term as president of the United States. But what can we learn from the way the media treats Jimmy Carter? Esau, what do you say? Skye, what do you say?
I mean, I think that we can take a lot from Jimmy Carter's the way that he treated his wife, from what I can tell from afar. From the fact that he was faithfully married to his wife for his entire life. As far as I know, there's no scandals attached to him there. I think the fact that he lived out his Christian faith by service in this local church, I think that's important. I think that you can see that he also lived out his faith in how he cared practically for other people. And I think all of those things are laudatory. And I think that that's a good example for anybody to follow. If you happen to be married, treat your spouse well and remain faithful to them. Don't cheat on them. Serve in your local church and practically express your faith by the way that you treat those people who don't have the resources to pay you back. I think those are things that you can learn from Jimmy Carter.
I agree. And I would summarize it this way. I think Jimmy Carter was an exceptional humanitarian and a somewhat crummy politician. And those are actually two compliments because I think to be a really good, shrewd politician is a hard thing. It is a calling for some people, but it does require a willingness to compromise on some principles that I think Christians should find it really hard to compromise on. And he didn't. And that made him a poor politician at times.
Okay. Well, there you go. I guess we're done. But is it okay, Esau, that the world is attracted to humanitarian Christians and ascribes their humanitarian work to their Christian faith without getting into doctrine?
I get it. No, that's not a bad thing. People should see, they would know you by how you treat other people as like a common Christian idea. So I don't think it's bad that someone says these Christians are people who care about the poor and who do things for the poor. I just feel like it's very easy for us to say, look at all of the good things that Jimmy Carter did. Look at how Jimmy Carter embodied Jesus. Look at how these other people don't embody Jesus. And these are people who we didn't like before Jimmy Carter died. And so Jimmy Carter's death becomes an occasion for us to duck on the people who we already don't like. And I just don't find that the most unique take, which is what the media did. In other words, it's not like Jimmy Carter's death was freshly revelatory for certain elements of the Christian right. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't praise Jimmy Carter. I'm saying that there is an obsession with, here are the things that a certain segment of white evangelicalism has done wrong. And every single thing that exists is an example of that phenomenon. And I'm just tired of saying it. I've said it 1,000 times. And so it may feel like I'm just like afraid to praise Jimmy Carter. I'm just like, yeah, I could praise Jimmy Carter and use Jimmy Carter's life as a cudgel for people who I might disagree with politically. And I'm trying to say in 2025, I'm going to put that cudgel down and try to have a better conversation.
Okay. That's a good point. I appreciate that point. I will not use Jimmy Carter as a cudgel. That is my New Year's resolution. I will not use Jimmy Carter as a cudgel. I will use him as an inspiration. And
there we go.
A peanut farmer. Okay. That is cool that a peanut farmer became president, though. It's, people were inspired by that story until they decided they didn't like him that much after all.
Yeah, one last question I have, though, is do you think it's possible for somebody who exhibits the qualities that marked Jimmy Carter's political life to ever ascend to the presidency again?
Not when the biggest Christian voting bloc has decided those qualities are not getting them what they want. That would have to change, and I don't know what would change that. Esau, agree, disagree?
I think we'd have to have a larger conversation as to like what the Christian voting bloc is. Because I would say that, like, once again, there's people, I would say the Christian vote, you might say that there's a white evangelical Christian voting bloc that's a certain set of political priorities. But there's significant sections of the church that has a different set of political priorities that also maintain a strong faith in Jesus. And so I think it's hard. I think it's hard to be a person of integrity and not compromise morally and make it to the top of most industries. And so when you think about
except
business,
the church, if you have integrity, you go right to the top. You go right to the top. Even something as simple as like social media or YouTube videos and stuff. So if you are a Christian who just gets on YouTube and destroys other Christians and call them all heretics, you get more views and get more followers. If you're just saying, hey, I want to just talk to people about Jesus and talk to them about the Bible and have a social media presence about sharing the glories of Christianity, then that's going to struggle to grow. And so I think that because of humanity's brokenness, because of our need to find kind of worth by the destruction of our enemies, it's just hard to grow things by love. Here's the thing, though. It didn't work for Jesus in the sense that they killed him, right? It's not like Jesus did this ministry. He was like, you know what? We really, really want that. We really said, give us Barabbas, right? And so it's not. And so I think that the tendency to reject beautiful things is a truth of human nature. And so you're right. It's hard. It's hard to be a person of integrity and win. And when we do, it's almost like an exception that proves the rule. Okay.
You made my point perfectly. I totally agree.
Yeah, it was, Christianity didn't really take off until Constantine got involved. And that's what we need. We need a Caesar-like figure to... Okay.
Well, history would say the opposite.
Yeah, Christianity grew the fastest pre-Constantine.
That's right.
We became a dominant world power, and then Constantine co-opted us, and then we went sideways. But that's a podcast for another day.
That's a podcast for another day. If you'd like to hear more of Esau's thoughts, Esau has his own podcast. What's your podcast called, Esau?
The Not As Good as Holy Post Show, also known as the Esau McCaulley Podcast.
The Esau McCaulley Podcast. Go check it out.
It's 100% bubble butt free.
Yeah, there we go.
How many episodes have you done? How many episodes?
I have no idea. I've not counted them.
15, 16, something like that?
15 to 16, yes.
Okay, go check them out. McCrae's been on. So, who else has been on that we like?
Nancy French.
Justin Giboney's been on. Nancy French has been on.
Tish Harrison Warren.
Yeah.
Lisa Fields.
Yeah.
All right.
you don't give me. I mean, everyone's been on there, so I don't want to name any.
All the cool kids, all the cool kids,
all the uncool kids. Oh yeah,
Mr.
Oprah.
Rogers.
I mean, she's not. Me and Oprah haven't really gotten our calendars together yet. We're still negotiating. Like she's busy and I'm busy. It's a thing,
you're busy.
But we'll see.
She's free. Yeah. You're busy. Okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening in. Go to holypost.com. Check out Holy Post Plus. There's lots of cool stuff you can subscribe to. Check out Esau's podcast, the Esau McCaulley Show podcast. Esau McCaulley podcast. Whatever. Just type in Esau McCaulley and try to spell it. Good luck. And the Skye Pod and Curiously Caitlin. All there. You can find it. And we will see you next week. Bye. This episode of the Holy Post is sponsored by Faithful Counseling. We've just come through a really stressful election year, and it doesn't look like things are going to get better anytime soon. Deleting Twitter from my phone has helped, but some levels of stress and anxiety can't just be deleted like an app. Sometimes we need real help. Faithful Counseling is a Christian counseling service with more than 3,000 licensed therapists across all 50 states, with access by video or phone sessions or even chat and text, with expertise in depression, stress, anxiety, trauma, family conflicts, and more. It's more affordable than traditional counseling, and financial aid is available for those who qualify. We all need to talk to someone sometime, and Faithful Counseling can help. Continue growing into the best version of yourself. Visit faithfulcounseling.com/holypost and get the professional, faith-based counseling that you need. They've even got a special offer for our listeners. Right now, you can get 10% off your first month at faithfulcounseling.com/holypost. This episode is sponsored by the Wheaton College Graduate School. Hey, are you a pastor or ministry leader? Would you like to continue your education without stepping away from your current ministry role? You need to know about the new Doctor of Ministry degree program at Wheaton College. You'll interact with world-class Wheaton faculty, some of whom you've gotten to know right here on the Holy Post podcast, as well as students from a broad range of theological traditions and perspectives to help expand your cultural intelligence and lead well in a contemporary, globalized world. With the flexible hybrid format, most of your learning will be online, with 1 week a semester at the Wheaton campus, allowing you to learn and serve at the same time. There's a special concentration starting this summer with Dr. John Dixon, Communicating Christ in Skeptical Times, exploring the challenges and opportunities of Christian leadership and ministry in our increasingly secular world. Go to wheaton.edu/communicatingchrist to learn more about the Doctor of Ministry program at the Wheaton College Grad School. That's wheaton.edu/communicatingchrist.
Gabriel Salguero is no stranger to the Holy Post. He's, of course, the pastor of The Gathering in Orlando and the president of the National Latino Evangelical Coalition. He's been doing a bunch of media appearances lately because of the incoming administration's talk about its plan to deport over 10 million undocumented immigrants. It's an audacious plan, and some are saying that it's completely unrealistic and too expensive to ever really get accomplished. But it's still sending shockwaves and a lot of fear through communities around the US and churches. So Gabe and I were texting about this the other day, and I invited him on the show to talk about what he's doing at his church and how he's advising other Christians and Christian communities to plan for what might be ahead in a second Trump term after January 20th. Here is my conversation with Gabriel Salguero. Gabe, my friend, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Skye. And if I haven't said it before, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Okay, to get the year started, we have a new president, or an old president who's going to be new again, heading back into office in a few weeks. One of the key elements of Trump's reelection, both critics and advocates agree with this, is his promise to really crack down on immigration, more border security. But what was kind of new from 2016, he always talked about build a wall. This time it was much more focused on deportation of undocumented folks. Mm-hmm. And there's a spectrum of views on this, a spectrum of responses to it. I want to begin kind of pastorally. You mentioned to me at one of our conversations recently that you have people in your congregation who voted for Kamala Harris and who voted for Donald Trump, and you are called to minister and pastor to all these folks. How are people in your own church reacting to this talk of mass deportation, and how are you as a pastor addressing that?
If I'm honest, it's deep concern. it's sending, and I've said elsewhere, a chill up the spine of churches that work with immigrants. Because the truth is that the policy is not clear. We don't know how it's going to be implemented. We don't know how many people are going to be targeted. We don't know what spaces are going to be raided. And you and I have spoken before, offline, that it's important that we try to kind of dig through the ambiguity, that it's not clear. But what is clear is the rhetoric, and that the president-elect ran on a campaign promise of deportations, of mass deportations. How they're going to do it and how they're going to implement, we don't know. And so people are afraid and they're anxious. I think that's the sentiment that is most heard for me as a pastor and the coalition of pastors that we serve. And so that anxiety and that nervousness, we have to pastor them with a few things. First is, let's focus on the facts. Let's navigate for the truth. What is the truth? What policies exist? What policies may exist? Let's hope for the best, but prepare for any outcome. And so we've had Know Your Rights webinars with about 80-something bishops. And so the truth is that we want to tell them two things. Number one is Jesus understands you, for he too was a refugee, and he too had to leave his place of comfort. Number two, the church is a place that you can call home, no matter what's going on in politics or what's going on with immigration policy. The church is a place that you can call home. And number three, in the case of the Latino Evangelical Church and the larger church, there are a group of men and women who are going to speak up for the human dignity of immigrants and their families.
I'm curious how, we'll dig into some of those things in greater detail in a minute, but I'm curious how folks in your church who support President-elect Trump are responding when you say these kinds of things. Did they vote for him because of his rhetoric around mass deportation? Are they surprised? Here's an example. I was talking to president recently of a retail company, and he was telling me that they had a board meeting, and their board, there's one board member who's a very, very, very vocal Trump supporter. And part of the agenda of the board meeting was a contingency plan if and when the tariffs go into effect, because a lot of their product comes into the United States through Mexico. And this board member was like, well, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, if these tariffs go into effect, it's going to severely impact our business. And they're like, no, Trump wasn't serious about that. And it's not going to affect us. And they're like, no, we think he was serious. And it was evident at this board meeting that the Trump supporter didn't believe that his policies would actually go into effect and actually affect the business. But now that it is, they're surprised. Are there people like that in your church who's like, well, he didn't really believe all that stuff about mass deportation? Are they surprised, or did they go, yeah, this is what we wanted, and this is what we voted for? And what tensions does that cause?
100%. There are people who say, no, he's not going to do mass deportation. He's going to focus on violent criminals, on people who've done damage in the communities. By the way, most of us want the government to address violent criminals, right?
Sure.
On both sides of the aisle. I don't think there's much disagreement. Some people draw straw adversaries about this. They're saying, oh yeah, there's a group that wants open borders and violent criminals to run free. That's actually not the case. Right. And I think those people who voted for Trump think that that's what's going to happen, that there's only going to be deportations of violent criminals, people who've committed violent crimes. But for a whole group of other people, some of them say, well, we're glad he's deporting a lot of people because the border has been chaos and our immigration policy has been chaos. And we need somebody to rein it in. And their view is, in lieu of chaos, we need this extreme position. Now, obviously, when they say that, they keep thinking, but it's not going to be that true. They're not going to deport 2 million people, 3 million people. It's going to be the violent criminals. And so I think...
it's not going to be the people in my church or my community that
it's not going to be the little girl in my Sunday school class.
Yeah.
The kid who comes to school with my kid is not going to be waiting outside for his mom or dad to pick him up, right? And his mom or dad may have been deported and he's sitting there by the curb at the school. That's not going to happen. And so there's some of that. And let me just be really honest. I think there's also a group of apologists, religious apologists who on the left and the right exist, right? When I was younger, they used to call them rent-a-collar, that the partisans would would rent a clergy collar to apologize for them and make moral gymnastics around any argument. And there are some of those who, no matter what their preferred candidate does or says, they're going to create moral gymnastics and defend it. And that, to me, is the most disconcerting. When you twist yourself into a pretzel to defend a policy that's in direct contradiction to gospel values.
Let's talk about some of that uncertainty about what's going to happen. You mentioned the ambiguity. And in 2016, Donald Trump in that campaign said an awful lot about building a wall and making Mexico pay for it. And in his first administration, not only have we not gotten the check, there are long stretches of the southern border that have no wall. Correct. So it was evident that he used that more as great sloganeering and campaigning more than a truly convicted policy belief that he held. Is there a chance that that's what we're seeing again? Only this time it's mass deportation, and he used that rhetoric to get reelected. But now that he's going to be back in office, to be like, they'll empty a couple of undocumented folks, violent criminals, out of prison and send them back. But that's going to be the extent of it. Or is there real concern that this is going to be, unlike the wall, a real concerted, convicted policy effort?
The truth is, nobody knows. You're asking us to get into the mind of a candidate who's made many promises that are just slogans or political rhetoric. But some he's acted on to a deleterious effect in our communities, and in our families. And so the truth is, we don't know. And that's why it's disconcerting. There are some who argue, well, they're making these statements so people are afraid, so they self-deport. As a matter of fact, I just heard a report yesterday where the nominee for that position, for that border czar position, says, oh, the best thing for you to do is to leave the country. So he was advocating publicly on the news channel.
Sure, it saves the federal government a lot of money and effort.
That's correct. And so he said that openly. And so we don't know. The problem is that if 10% of what they say is true, that's going to have serious impact in families. That's going to have serious impact on the economy, on agriculture, on the food you buy. It's going to have a serious impact on churches. You know, I said in a interview on one of these religious presses, I'm really concerned, Skye. I'm really concerned that there are pastors who take the tithes of undocumented immigrants, but won't speak up for them. At best, that's inconsistent. At worst, it can be hypocritical. So we'll take your money, but we won't speak up for you. And that for me is disconcerting. And so we don't know. And so what we're telling people is, don't engage in panic. Panic is never the right answer, but also don't be unprepared. Prepare.
Yeah, let's talk about what that means to be prepared. You've been having these meetings with other pastors and church leaders, I'm sure members of your church. You mentioned informing them about their legal options. What does that look like? What kind of things are you helping people understand? And let's say they really do embark on some effort of mass deportation. What are the legal options that you think churches, church leaders, and undocumented folks themselves may be able to appeal to?
Look, I have a real case study after one of our trainings. After one of our trainings, maybe a week after, we had a pastor called Jeanette, my wife, who's really leading some of these trainings, and said to her, a woman called us that immigration came to her door and says, we've been tipped that there are undocumented immigrants here. Actually, illegals, I think is the language they used. And we want to come in and check. But because she had been trained in Know Your Rights, she says, well, you can't come in. You need a search warrant. Right? This is private property. You can't just come in because you think. And the agent, according to her narrative, says, oh, yeah, but my colleague is in the car. He has a search warrant. Let us in. And she said, okay, when your colleague comes with the search warrant, you can come in. Right? 9 out of 10 times, people are so afraid they'll let the person right in, not knowing that there's a whole kind of jurisprudence and legal precedent around unlawful search and seizure, that you need a search warrant. And so those kinds of things.
And those rights extend to people who are undocumented. It's not only for citizens.
Well, first of all, how do you know if someone's undocumented?
Right. But that's my point is even if you are undocumented, you don't it doesn't mean you can't express those
Yeah,
realities, those constitutional realities. Yeah.
The government can't just come into my home and ask to look around my house. There is a kind of legal precedent. I own this home. It's private property. That's one. The other thing I'm really concerned about, Skye, listen, I have 2 young male children, right? 19 and 15. They're driving, they get pulled over. Law enforcement, overwhelmingly, I have law enforcement in my church. I have state troopers, I have sheriffs. They're good people, overwhelmingly law enforcement, but they're not trained around immigration. They don't have expertise. And they asked my 19-year-old son, who's a sophomore in college, show me your birth certificate. My son doesn't carry around his birth certificate. Right. He was born in New York City, in Queens. Or if they pull me over, DWB, driving while brown, and they say to me, hey, can you show me your passport? Who carries their passport? And so these are the real concern is around racial profiling of Asians and Africans and African Americans and Latinos. That's really concerning because that creates a deeper schism between good people of color and good law enforcement who are being forced to do a job they weren't trained to do. And so I don't know if the U.S. has the resources to implement this extreme, mass deportation. It would be the largest movement of people since the book of Exodus. I mean, think about that. We're talking a lot of people. And so I'm concerned about these other impacts on the economy, on agriculture, but on also local communities of color and racial profiling.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that too in a little bit. Let me back up a second to the scenario that you mentioned. This woman gets a knock at the door from ICE, and she says, "Where's the warrant? You can't come in. There's constant." I can imagine someone listening to that story and going, "Yeah, but doesn't that same principle apply to the borders of the United States? Like, someone shouldn't just be able to walk across a border and come in. They should have to come in legally." Show identification, go through a checkpoint. Like, you can't just walk into my home. You can't just walk into my country. What do you say to someone about the reality of our broken border and what needs to be done there? And there was a bill that was in Congress recently that could have done a lot here. It didn't. So
a bipartisan bill that had strong Republican and strong Democratic support.
Right. I want to make sure people don't hear you saying that the system as it is fine.
So my answer is yes, absolutely. That's why we need comprehensive immigration reform. The reason we need reform is because the system is broken. The reason we need reform is because the border is not running the way it should be. And so what is the law? That's the first. The biggest challenge is that there's a lot of myths running around.
Yes.
There's a lot of heat around immigration debates, but very little light. We need more light and less heat. We need statesmen and stateswomen who speak with clarity. We need an orderly immigration system at the border, right? The actual bill was offering more resources, more judges, more border patrol agents. The one that the president-elect asked for the Senate and the Congress not to continue on, that one would have helped us with the very same issues that people are rightfully, I need people to hear me, they're rightfully concerned about this. But the law is you are allowed to come to the border and solicit asylum.
Right.
That's a legal right. And then you are heard by a judge. But if we don't have enough judges, if we don't have enough immigration agents, we get all of this chaos and crisis. And so we are not for not securing the border. Quite the opposite. We are for securing the border, but we're also for bringing enough resources to bear, which, by the way, would be significantly less costly than mass deportation. Significantly less, in the billions of dollars less. You bring the resources so people can be adjudicated rightfully, so people who are being trafficked are protected, so families are protected, so national sovereignty is protected. It is not, the debate is not about let everybody in or deport everybody. The debate should be about how do we create an orderly system that respects the rule of law without violating human dignity of people created in the image of God. It should not be an either or conversation. It should be a both and. And I, for one, believe that the United States has the intellectual capital to bring a solution. Did you know that over 2/3 of Americans want common sense immigration reform? It's not the minority position. It's just that the extremes are putting so much heat on it that you think it's open borders or mass deportation. No, there's a middle road that makes sense for our country and for immigrant families.
I shared this on a recent episode where about a year ago, I was down at the southern border near Tijuana and San Diego, and I met with and interviewed a Border Patrol agent. And at one point I asked him, what is the one thing you wish you had that would help you do your job better that you don't have?
Great question.
And he said, and he laughed and he said, comprehensive immigration reform. and he said, I can't do my job until Congress does its job. And that's it. And we had a good start at that earlier in the year with that bipartisan bill that got killed.
By the way, Senator Langford, Republican stalwart, was one of the champions of that bill.
Exactly. So, but this is the part that leads to some cynicism. It feels like, at least in the rhetoric that's been coming from President-elect Trump and some of his appointees, it doesn't sound like there's an interest in actually solving this problem, and certainly not solving it in a way that maintains human dignity. Because if they were serious about solving this dilemma, they would be talking about a comprehensive bill for immigration reform, of increasing resources, of immigration judges and courts to adjudicate all these asylum claims and more orderly system. They'd be talking about that, but they're not. What they're talking about is rounding up millions of undocumented folks and sending them back home, which is kind of red meat to the base of the MAGA constituency, but it doesn't actually solve anything. And it violates human dignity in many ways. So, okay, let me turn the corner a little bit. You've talked about some of the legal realities of this. What about the moral realities? None of us are hoping that the worst happens, but if we start going in that direction, what do you think is the moral responsibility of Christians, of church leaders, of congregations in response to the potential of rounding up folks who are undocumented? What should we be prepared to do?
And look, this is a matter of conscience. And so I want to be careful that what I share, I'm not establishing it as normative for everybody. I think that that's one of the dangers that we preachers often have is this is what I would do, so everybody should do it the way I do.
Sure.
I think we should engage this with some humility that this complexity demands. Let's start with that. Let's admit this is hard, right? Instead of just throwing cliche bombs over the air and just, let's admit that this is difficult and we didn't get here in a day. That the last time we had change in immigration was when major change, not, pastiche, was under Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. So let's get our hands around that. But the pastoral response is, number one, advocacy. We should continue to advocate for common sense immigration reform that's bipartisan. I was in the Senate many years ago when the Group of Eight brought the legislation. It passed in the Senate. Senator Rubio was a part of that group. Lindsey Graham was a part of that group, and others from the Democrats. And so there were 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans who led that. And it was good. It almost passed, and the House refused to take it up. And so, advocate for Congress. You must do your job. Advocate for common sense, humane border enforcement and family unity immigration reform. So advocacy from I'm a Christian, so I'm going to come from a gospel-centered perspective, not from a partisan perspective. Number 2, comfort immigrant families. I think some people forget that there's mixed status families. What happens if you deport the mom and dad and the 8-year-old daughter or son is a citizen? Is our foster care system ready for that? Well, are our churches ready for that?
Both Donald Trump and some of his appointees have said they can go with their parents.
They can. Have they been to some of these countries where there are gangs knocking on people's doors saying, we're going to take your daughter tomorrow, or we're recruiting your son? And so it's easy to say from distance.
I know. Hold on a second, though. That's the humane response you're giving, but there is a legal dynamic to this. Is that 8-year-old girl born in the United States
It's a citizen.
is a citizen of the United States. So the idea of the United States government deporting an American citizen is, I mean, how bonkers is that? They can't legally pull that off. So, and then the other option is to break up a family and deprive that child of her parents, which doesn't seem humane or legal either.
Hey, Skye, I'm an evangelical. I still hold to that nomenclature because I refuse to let anyone else define it for me. I respect people who, for them, is too burdensome, and I respect that decision. But it's not my case as a brown evangelical to let go of that nomenclature. That it took us a long time to even get included. Once we get included, people want to drop it. But anyway, we'll talk about that in another episode. Hey, let the children come unto me are the words of Jesus. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Those are the words of Jesus. And I take Jesus.
Yeah, but they're not
seriously.
the words of George Washington, though. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, if I had to pick between Jesus and George Washington, love me some George. Love me some Delaware crossing George.
Mm-hmm.
I love me the national narrative of I cut down the cherry tree. All of that's great. But if I had to choose between my allegiance between George Washington and Jesus of Nazareth, as a Christian, I'm going with Jesus of Nazareth.
I agree. Obviously.
Yeah.
I just, it concerns me that there are quite a few people who put their American identity and allegiance ahead of their allegiance to Christ.
That's right. And look, the children who are born here, according to the 14th Amendment, they have citizenship. And think about how long, and this is where I was going with this. I love the term evangelical. We have historically been, rightfully so, I think, a pro-family Christian movement. How can we, with one hand, say we're pro-family and with another hand say we're okay with separating families? One of these things is not like the other. And so you can't be pro-family and pro-family separation. That's a inherent contradiction. And so it's true that Joseph and Mary had to take Jesus into Egypt. They had to, because they were being persecuted by an edict of the killing of the innocents. And so we have to look at this, I, as a Christian, right, have to look at this with a gospel lens, because my primary allegiance is not to partisan politics. It's not to my nation, and I have an allegiance to my nation, but it's not my primary allegiance. It's to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the gospel of Jesus Christ has a high value on the dignity of people and families.
Let's talk about the story from the Gospels of Jesus and his family fleeing Herod. Herod's government did not force Mary and Joseph and Jesus to go to Egypt. They willingly went to Egypt to avoid persecution and death. So in a way, they made the environment so hostile that Jesus and his family self-deported.
That's exactly right.
And became refugees. We mentioned earlier a lot of the ambiguity that's coming out of the Trump administration around what exactly they would and wouldn't do. You mentioned before we got on the air, recent interview on CNN with, what's his name? The
Holman,
yeah. The immigration czar who's in charge, been deputized by Donald Trump to carry out all this stuff. And he was very evasive in giving any direct answers about what the plan's going to be. Is part of the ambiguity here, and I'm drawing from history because when I've read up on prior movements of deportation in the 1930s and the 1950s, the federal government was very limited in its effectiveness of actually identifying, capturing, and deporting people. But what they were very effective at was creating such an anti-immigrant environment in the United States that a lot of people felt so discriminated against, so persecuted, and in some cases even threats of violence, that they self-deported. Is that really the goal here, is to create so much backlash against Latino Americans and Latinos who aren't yet American citizens that they will self-deport and try to evade vigilante justice and other things that may be happening in their community against them?
Look, I think whether it's the intent or not, it certainly is the outcome. I got a call, right? As you know, Jeanette and I serve a coalition of several thousand Hispanic evangelical churches. And after we did these trainings, we've done 2 on the status of immigration. somebody called who is a teacher in a public school system and was told by the administrator, we've already had 8 families say we're not sending our kids to school and we're leaving.
Wow.
Now, transition hasn't happened. There hasn't been an inauguration. And so it is having that effect, intended or not. And it breaks my heart because fear should not be a tool that we use to scare away children or families. In Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of fear, right? Perfect love cast away all fear, Scripture says. And it's fascinating to me how many Christians are willing to use fear as a tool and just cast away love of neighbor. This doesn't mean we don't have the respect for the rule of law, but when you create hostility to the degree that children are afraid to come to school, I don't see the compatibility with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I think that may be the intent, but whether it is or it isn't, it's having that impact. Think about this. When there was rhetoric about certain immigrant communities, in this case, Haitian immigrants, eating animals, right? Total myth, total falsehood around Haitian communities in Ohio. People knew that wasn't true. Why do they do it? I think for us as Christians or well-meaning people, whether you're Christian or not, people who are thinking deeply about democracy, we have to ask the why question. The why question matters. Why is this rhetoric happening? Why are we saying stories about entire communities that are just simply verifiably untrue? I don't think we ask the why question enough. And it's one of the reasons I like Holy Post, because you don't just tell us, as Marvin Gaye would say, what's going on, but you ask the question, why is it going on? What's the intent behind this? Because for Christians, intentions of the heart matter.
Absolutely. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to repeat something you said earlier, that one, we do need to be advocating with our representatives in Congress for comprehensive, humane immigration reform. And so I'd encourage people, look up online, find out who's your representative, contact their office, leave a phone call, send an email, advocate for things as a Christian. And you can be all for border security and right. Knowing who's coming in and who's going out of the country, all that. I totally affirm that, and still do it in a humane way. That's number one. But number two, I want to ask you as we wrap up, Gabe, we're a few weeks out from the inauguration. Once Donald Trump is back in office, what are some early things you're going to be looking for as sort of canaries in the coal mine, if you will, or indicators of what might we be in store for with his immigration rhetoric and his mass deportation talk? Are there signs that will indicate it's going to be better than you thought, about the same, or worse than you thought based on early actions of this administration?
That's a great question. So let me give you a few initial thoughts. Number one, how often I hear Miller and Holman publicly.
Jason Miller. And
yes. How
Holman,
often they are out in front of the camera saying we're doing this. That is going to be a sign not just of the tenor and tone, but the execution. And so the voices of Miller and Holman, how prominent they are, will be a sign of how serious this mass deportation policy is. Number two, if there are changes in TPS, temporary protective status, and DACA, if there are strong efforts to repeal people who are already here legally and have some type of protective status, whether it's DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, for the Dreamers, most people know them as the Dreamers, or temporary protective status that was given to Cubans, Nicaraguans, Haitians, and Venezuelans. Then if they're even going after that, then that's another sign. If there are contracts between Department of Homeland Security and DOD, Department of Defense, for building of beds, if you start seeing the expansion of detention facilities, people don't often talk about the correlation of mass detention, mass incarceration, and immigration. Right? You have to build facilities, right? If you see the ramping up, and yesterday I heard a few people say, hey, there's this intention to do that, to ramp up, to go from 50,000 beds to 100,000 beds in short order. If you start seeing that, you start seeing money allocated for increased detention centers, you see how serious that is. And then if you continue to see Congress, and I think this will happen, because there's a lot of stuff going out there, anti-poverty initiatives, other things. If you see them put immigration before, the child tax credit, the tax cuts and all that, and you're seeing money allocated already first for immigration before they start talking about the tax policies and the child tax credit, that is going to be serious deportation policy. So those are a few of the sides. And the other thing is, let's see how much at that time, after the inauguration, the president will lead with that and what rhetoric he uses. So those are a couple of the signs.
Yeah, great. That's super helpful. As we go, I just want to remind everybody, there's this instinct to just demonize Donald Trump as the instigator of all of this. And yes, he certainly bears responsibility. But the reason we're here is because a whole bunch of people didn't do their jobs. And I don't want to give a pass to Donald Trump, but he's not even in office yet. And the reason why he was able to run on this issue in the first place, in my opinion at least, is I don't think the Biden administration did a particularly good job of dealing with this dilemma, and especially Congress. Congress had the chance to pass comprehensive immigration reform and make substantive changes to a broken system, and they lacked the courage and backbone to do that, especially the Republicans, who lacked the courage to defy, at the time, candidate Trump and do what was best for the country. And so it's been a systemic, repeated failure of our political leadership to handle this in a humane way and in a just way that gave an opening for somebody to address this in an inhumane and potentially catastrophic way. And
That's
so
right. Look, I want to say something. When Obama deported more people than any president in history, I took the same position. This is not a partisan issue. I'm a pastor. I'm going to speak up against anyone who's separating families or incarcerating children or holding them in cells. Doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. But the truth is, Skye, you're quite right. Who legislates? Presidents don't legislate. They take executive orders. They implement immigration policies, and Congress legislates. And the inaction of Congress has led us to this place. And so we need to do that. And the other thing is, let's be honest, my read, and I have a limited read, is that people use immigration as a political ping pong.
yes, absolutely.
They're just, talking points on the left and the right. Let's talk less and legislate more. We can fix this. This is not an intractable problem.
Right.
The U.S. sends people to outer space. They spend billions of dollars in NASA and we've created cars that drive themselves. And I mean, we are just wonderful things happening. We can fix this if, instead of using it as a kind of political ping pong to get votes or to mobilize our base on the left and the right, we take common sense, humane action that secures the border while respecting the dignity of every human being created in the image and likeness of God. These are not mutually exclusive. Lo podemos hacer, Skye. Lo podemos. I had to drop some Spanish in there. Lo podemos hacer. We can do it.
We can do it. Gabe, thank you so much for your pastoral wisdom and your prophetic voice on this. And I'm grateful that you do have access to the halls of power and the halls in the church to lead us in this. Thanks for being with us again.
Thank you, Skye.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to Holy Post Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much, much more.